Welcome back. Today is a special day. Today we are going to take what we learned so far in the science of natural healing and apply it to an actual person. In short, I want you to become a holistic integrative medicine physician. So imagine yourself in the office, and a woman comes in to see you. Her name is Nancy. Nancy is 58 years old, and she tells you she has a new diagnosis of diabetes, high cholesterol, and high blood pressure. When you ask Nancy what made her want to come and see you, she says, "I have never been on medication before. Now I am on 3 pills, 1 for high blood pressure, 1 for diabetes, and 1 for high cholesterol. Is there some other way than taking all of these medicines?" We are really happy Nancy asked that question. And we are equally happy that she came in to see us, aren't we? Because in our paradigm of health, we no longer just talk about diseases. That's the old way, the ill to the pill. Nancy was diagnosed with 3 ills, so she has been given 3 pills. But this is holistic integrative medicine. And this is the science of natural healing. So we definitely have another way. So let's review some of the basic principles of holistic integrative medicine. Remember, we teach to treat the whole person, body, mind, emotions, and spirit. We believe the emotional, mental, and spiritual aspects of healing cannot be separated from the physical. We believe food, daily activity, meditation is medicine. And we believe in the healing power of connection and touch. So, with these principles in mind, we begin to put together all the different pieces of Nancy's story. But before we do that, let us take a step back. Let's go back to some basics and do a physical exam. Now, we find that Nancy is overweight. And we're already thinking, is this overweight contributing to her diabetes? Her high blood pressure? We know it is. Her body mass index is 30. And remember, the goal for women is less than 22. We also notice something else about Nancy. She is wearing her weight around her midline. It's abdominal fat. We make a note that Nancy is shaped like an apple instead of a pear. We also know that this shape is associated with a higher risk of heart disease. We check Nancy's blood pressure and find it is indeed high, 140/90. And remember, we said 120/80 is normal. Nancy's laboratory tests give us lots of information. They confirm that she does have diabetes. They also confirm that her cholesterol is high. In fact, her good cholesterol, the HDL, is low. And you remember that when the HDL is low, the triglycerides frequently go high. And that's exactly what Nancy has. In addition, Nancy's LDL, remember we said lousy cholesterol, That is also high. We noticed two other things in Nancy's blood test. The first is that her vitamin D level is low. So she has vitamin D deficiency. And this is really important. We also noticed something else. There's a special blood test for inflammation. And that blood test is called an HS, capital C, capital R, capital P, HS-CRP. That blood test is high, so that tells us that Nancy is inflamed. So now we're thinking, Nancy is overweight, she has diabetes, and she already has signs of inflammation. So we decide to draw Nancy a picture of a tree. And we go up to the branches and we label 3 sick leaves on the tree. We call them diabetes, high cholesterol, and high blood pressure. We point out to Nancy that Western medicine typically goes right up to the sick leaves and either cuts them off through surgery, bypasses them through surgery, or applies pharmaceutical therapy. We explained to Nancy that that's not our approach. We explained to her that just as the health of the tree depends on the quality of its soil, her own health depends on the soil she lives in. What is the quality of her soil? So up until now, we really have the truncated or shortened version of Nancy's story, don't we? We know a few things. We have problems that have been labeled, diabetes and high blood pressure and high cholesterol. But those are just names. So we made a diagnosis. But in order to strengthen Nancy's soil, we need to take a deeper look, don't we? So we asked Nancy to tell us her story. Nancy begins to tell us her story, and she starts with her work. She says, I'm a corporate executive. She was born in Wisconsin and raised on a farm. She describes her childhood as very happy. She had no medical problems as a child. Her mom stayed at home and raised Nancy and her 2 siblings. She describes the household as happy. She was raised Catholic. She describes herself as spiritual. But she adds, she has had no time for church and has no time for a spiritual practice. So we're thinking here about adverse childhood events, and we're not hearing any. Nancy, it sounds like, had a really happy childhood. But it seems like maybe she got a little disconnected from her spiritual practices because of her work. What else do we learn from Nancy? Well, Nancy tells us she left home to attend university at the age of 17. She completed a master's in business administration, and she is the CEO of a startup company. She describes her work days as long, and she eats out in restaurants most nights. Nancy tells us she is not married and has never been married. She has no children. We ask about her friends, and she tells us that she has 3 close friends, and that is her main social network. She has no pets at home and no partner or significant other. And she adds, who has the time? As we listen to Nancy's story, we are listening for clues, something that will give us some insight that can be used to turn the course of her health challenges around. So we now have the opportunity to ask Nancy a few questions. Since we have been saying all along in the science of natural healing that food comes first, we want to know, what is Nancy eating? So we do a nutrition assessment, and we find that Nancy loves simple carbohydrates, and she eats lots of sugar. This includes granola, bagels at the office, muffins at the office. Nancy tells us, I eat whatever the staff brings in. Nancy also tells us that she usually misses lunch, and again says, I'm too busy. But she does drink coffee at least 3 cups a day, and she puts in sugar and cream. She eats less than 3 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, and says her major protein is almost always beef and chicken. Nancy informs us that she has never had a food allergy, and she has never heard the term food sensitivity. So we ask Nancy, do you crave any foods? Is there a food that you really like? And she right away says dairy. I love things like cheese, cottage cheese. Remember, she says, I come from Wisconsin. By listening to Nancy, we also learn that she has a couple of other important symptoms. Let's go through those. She tells us she has gas and bloating, and sometimes it alternates with diarrhea and constipation. She describes pain in her joints, all her joints, but especially her hands. Well, we are now thinking we have to add an additional thick leaf to Nancy's tree, because Nancy is telling us she has arthritis. So that gives us 4 medical challenges to address: diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and now arthritis. We asked Nancy some more questions because we need to know. We want to know more about her lifestyle. Fortunately, she tells us she has never smoked a cigarette, and that's really great because cigarette smoking is one of the biggest risk factors for a woman to have a heart attack. Nancy tells us she drinks 2 glasses of red wine per night, and she adds, it helps me to unwind. Her aerobic exercise is less than 1 hour per week, and she does no strength training. Nancy has no formal stress reduction practice. When we ask about this, she reminds us of her very busy schedule. So let's stop for a moment and think about what we are hearing. What do you think about those 2 glasses of wine per night? Remember, wine is pure sugar. But even more concerning, Nancy is using the alcohol to help manage her stress. Remember what she said, it helps me to unwind. And we know for women, 2 drinks of alcohol a night is too many. The maximum should be maybe 3 to 4 drinks per week, and she is well above that. What about Nancy's lack of exercise? Well, that's adding to every single sick leaf that she has on her tree. Everything she has, diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, everything would get better with exercise. So now we know a little bit about Nancy's physical body. We know some of her habits, her nutrition, her exercise, her use of alcohol. We now ask Nancy if she would be willing to fill out some questionnaires to help us better assess her emotional, mental, and even spiritual status. And she readily agrees. I bet you can guess the results. Nancy scored high in 3 areas. She scored high in depression, high in social isolation, and high in perceived stress. So we now have one more leaf to add to our tree, and that's called depression. We now have a lot of important information about Nancy. So let's start to think about, how do we put this all together as integrative holistic medicine physicians and make some truly life-saving recommendations? And yet let's use all of the knowledge that we learned in the science of natural healing. And remember, we are going to care for Nancy as a whole person, body, mind, emotions, and spirit. So let's get started. Now let's look at what is contributing to those sick leaves on Nancy's tree, and let's pick the top 3 that will influence every one of those sick leaves: her diet, her lack of exercise, and stress. So what do we recommend? Let's go back to the beginning. Food first. Let's identify Nancy's problems. She has diabetes. Her triglycerides, remember, are high, and that's the form of fat that comes from sugar. Her LDL, the bad cholesterol, is also high, and that's the form of fat that comes from saturated fat. So we recommend a low sugar or low glycemic diet. But we also want to eliminate the saturated fat. Isn't this sounding like the anti-inflammatory Mediterranean diet? Let's take a look at it. So we tell Nancy, we want you to eat foods that are low in sugar. We want you to pick fruits and vegetables that are low on the glycemic index. Things like apples, peaches, pears, and plums. And we definitely don't want you to eat anything white, except for maybe cabbage and cauliflower. And they're not truly, truly white, but certainly no refined sugar and no simple carbohydrates. Fortunately, Nancy tells us she likes beans and lentils, so we encourage her to eat them, and to eat them as a good source of protein, because these whole foods, we have learned and we know, are going to lower her cholesterol and lower her blood sugar. And we do have to remind Nancy about saturated fat. Remember, Nancy told us her main fat is chicken and beef. So we tell her that beef, pork, and lamb, cream, and full-fat dairy is not a good thing for her health. And she understands. Nancy looks a little bit concerned, and she tells us that she's worried she may not get enough protein if she's going to limit her carbohydrates. So we reinforce that we want her to eat complex carbohydrates, healthy carbohydrates, like green leafy vegetables. But because of her concerns, we recommend a protein smoothie. And then we come up with a really creative idea. Can we make a smoothie that can lower Nancy's triglycerides and her cholesterol? You bet we can. And so we recommend a smoothie that has soy protein, almond milk. We tell Nancy she can put her omega-3 fish oil in the smoothie. Remember, we said 4 grams of omega-3 will lower triglycerides 50%. We also recommend a little bit of fiber and a handful of her favorite berries, and we want her to buy them organic. We tell her she can have the berries frozen so they're like ice cubes if she enjoys her smoothie cold. Now, we know from Nancy's blood test that her vitamin D level is low. So we add some liquid vitamin D, and we give her a few drops in her smoothie every day. We have just created a smoothie that will lower triglycerides, lower cholesterol, give Nancy a nice protein boost, and not put weight on her. And we remind her, go slow with the fiber, because fiber can sometimes make gas and bloating worse. We recommend only 3 grams at this time, but we know our goal is 35 grams a day. And with the whole foods, we are going to work our way to that goal. There's one other piece to Nancy's story that sparked our attention, and I bet you're thinking about it. We put a leaf up on the tree that said arthritis, and that told us that Nancy had inflammation. And she told us she had inflammation because she said her joints were hurting. And the blood test confirmed the inflammation. That was the blood test called the hsCRP, and that was high. So let's review some of the potential causes of inflammation in Nancy. Remember, we said midline weight produces inflammatory cytokines. So just having your weight in the midline can make you inflamed. We talked about lots of food causes of inflammation, and we said number 1 was sugar. And Nancy is consuming lots of sugar. Nancy is also not exercising. She is eating red meat, which is pro-inflammatory, and even stress can lead to inflammation. But there's one other thing going on. That combination of arthritis that Nancy has and that gas and bloating. And we suspect that Nancy has a sensitivity to dairy. So because of the gas and bloating and the arthritis, we tell Nancy that we suspect she has a dairy sensitivity. She also gave us another clue to this. She told us the one food she craves all the time is what? Dairy. And remember this pearl. The food we probably should avoid is the one we crave the most. That's one of the principles of food sensitivity. So we also asked Nancy to avoid cow's milk, cow's cheese, and substitute soy milk or almond milk or rice milk. She can even have small amounts of soy cheese, but a little bit, because some of them could have a high calorie and content. I also asked Nancy to decrease her alcohol and her caffeine. Remember, the alcohol is sugar, and the caffeine in some people can really increase blood pressure. So basically what we're doing with Nancy, and we're not even calling it this, is she's going to have a real detox. She's going to decrease the alcohol, decrease the caffeine, clear out the cow's milk, clear out the sugar. This is going to be a major, major, but wonderful change. Now, we know something that's a little bit of a trick. And we tell Nancy, decrease the alcohol and caffeine by 50%. Because we know if we say just stop it, we may not have success. We give Nancy one other food tip. We want her to stay very hydrated, plenty of water throughout the day. And if she likes tea, we recommend green tea. Because remember, green tea lowers cholesterol. But we tell her unsweetened green tea. We encourage her to avoid eating anything in a can or a package. Why? Because most of these processed foods are really high in sodium. So if she decides to eat something that's not a whole food, she needs to look at that label and look at the sodium content and keep that sodium below 1,500 milligrams per day, because we know that the low sodium diet can really reduce high blood pressure. What else can we do? What else can we offer Nancy at this point? We certainly need to talk about exercise, because every issue that Nancy has will be improved with exercise. So we explained to Nancy that exercise lowers blood pressure and helps us to decrease our weight. We also explained that she might not be fully ready for a big exercise program because she hasn't done exercise in a long time. So we start easy and we give her a pedometer. And we tell her that her goal is 10,000 steps a day. How does she get there? Well, we make some easy recommendations. Park the car further away. Take the steps and not the elevator. And make time in the midday to walk for at least a half an hour. We also know that the exercise is going to lower Nancy's blood sugar. And exercise is a treatment for depression. But we don't stop there. Those are just the physical body recommendations. Remember, we are holistic integrative medicine physicians. And we've identified that Nancy has some concerns. One is social isolation. Another is stress. And the third being depression. We recognize that her vitamin D level was low, and we know that low vitamin D is linked to depression. So we added the vitamin D into her smoothie. And we've seen that Nancy has a religious and spiritual belief system, but it really hasn't been integrated into her life. So let's think about stress. Nancy is quick to tell us that she's concerned about taking time out of her day for stress reduction. I don't have time for stress reduction, she says. We remind her that stress is one of the key ingredients, like lack of exercise, causing all of her problems. She looks a little bit surprised. We tell her that stress leads to weight in the midline. We tell her that stress leads to mindless eating. We just eat and we don't pay attention sometimes to what we're even doing. We also tell her that stress raises cholesterol and raises her blood pressure. Nancy now looks at us because she's beginning to understand what's been going on. And as she begins to soften, we ask Nancy a really important question. We ask her, what is the most important thing in your life? What makes you want to get better? What makes you want to live? Because after all, she came in to see us for a reason. And at this point, Nancy actually begins to cry. And she tells us that she really wants to stay well, to take care of her elderly parents. And she says, "They were so good to me growing up. I had every opportunity in life." So we have found Nancy's anchor, her reason to live. So we recommend repetitive prayer as a stress management tool for her. She was raised Catholic, and she tells us this feels right. We restructure her weekend to include walking with friends and maybe even going back to church. And as Nancy gets ready to leave, we review her program. We have given Nancy powerful tools to strengthen her soil, proper nutrition, micronutrients like vitamin D, a powerful smoothie. She knows to give up sugar and sodium. We gave her a pedometer, which she now has on her waist, and a walking plan. We didn't stop there. In addition, we gave her powerful stress reduction tools and a reminder to connect with community. But before Nancy leaves our office, we give her our secret ingredient. And it's love. And it's in the form of a big hug. And we let her know we are part of her healing team.